You're listening to Heritage Radio Network.
Hello, listeners, and welcome to Cutting the Curd. This is Jessica, and I'm joined today by Seth and Kate Leach of Woodlawn Farm in the Meadowy Valley of Vermont. Some incredible facts about Woodlawn is that Seth is the seventh generation to farm this land. In fact, he and Kate live in a home built in the 1790s, built by his family. So another fact for you, you may have enjoyed a cheese from Vermont made with their cow's milk without even knowing it, as they have been supplying cheesemakers for a while. And now they are in the business of cheesemaking under the Woodlawn name themselves. But we're going to take a few steps back into history first and talk about all of it to the present. Thank you for being here, Seth and Kate. Welcome to Cutting the Curd.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
So I'm going to start with you, Seth, because it's of your family. Yes. Can you take us through your family's history with this land and with dairy farming? Has the farm always been milking cows?
Yeah, as far as I know, it's been an operating dairy farm for as long as my family has owned it. Dating back to, we're saying 1831, and so from then until now, our family's been milking cows here twice a day, every day.
That's crazy.
A year.
Yeah.
Has it feels crazy.
So, and I can imagine that, Vermont is not heavily developed. So has it pretty much stayed the same where you are? Or have you seen or know of any great changes in the area?
That's a really interesting question, and I think to the kind of untrained eye, it does look the same, but to me, it looks pretty different.
Interesting. Can you say a little more about that?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. It has a lot to do with how many actual working farms there are in the area. The land is it's spectacularly beautiful and it's very productive. It's just amazing land for agriculture. There's lowland, fertile, river, valley soil, and hillside pastures and all that sort of stuff. And it used to support a great number of small dairy farms. And the trend in Vermont is no different to the trend nationally in the number of dairy farms. And so, if you go up on the hill behind the farm and look south down the valley, which is one of my favorite places on the farm, it looks a lot the same, but not all of the farms that you can see are operating anymore. Yes, I think the answer to your question is a little bit yes and no. As far as development, it's not covered with houses, but some of the pasture that used to be active has grown into brush, and not all of the farms remain active. So that's how it looks different to me.
So your family's dairy farming operation, in your memory, how far back does it go for you in terms of like where you could see a direct line between what your life in dairy farming, like that you learned from your parents and maybe they learned from, I don't know which side of the family it's from. Maybe you can even say a little bit about that. Was it always something that was just assumed would be carried on to the next generation? Was it something you always knew you were going to do?
I think deep down I did. It was never assumed by my mom and dad. I'm the oldest of four children, and I just had an awesome life growing up, and none of us were put under the sort of pressure that it would be to a kid to be expected to maintain something like that. But I did what I was my dad's shadow from as long for as long as I can remember. I mean, I used to go with him to breakfast up at the station restaurant in the village of Pollitt, where he'd sit down at a bar, sort of, it was a small place, and it would just be all farmers in there having breakfast, and it would be a full house, and growing up, I did all the things that a lot of kids do. I played sports, did all that stuff, and had a lot of different interests. But I was always helping on the farm, especially in the summer. And when the time came to go to college, I just kind of felt like I should get a degree, that was pointed towards farming. And I did that, and then I didn't really want I didn't want to go anywhere else and do a different job. But it was advised when we were in school to go out and get a job. Even if you have a family farm, go get a job. And I didn't really want to do that. And then I remember that my dad had a really bad shoulder the year that I was graduating from college, and he was also the last one to give up shoveling all of his corn fertilizer every spring. So I felt like maybe I should go home and bail the old man out on shoveling corn fertilizer for that spring. And so I was here, but I really always wanted to be here. And my parents never, my dad wouldn't have put pressure on me to make that decision. But that's really how it went down.
So when I was talking with Kate originally about having this conversation, Kate, you said there's something about becoming the adult in the landscape in which you were a kid. And I just thought that was so poignant. And I don't know what your background is, if you came from a similar,
No, no, not at all. I've lived in many cities, and I'm a Virginian, but now, been in Vermont for, gosh, almost a decade. But yeah, I was really struck. I mean, when Seth and I met, I came to the farm right away, and it was so interesting because he was, he sits at the head of the table in the room where he was a kid, sitting at that dining room table, and has all these experiences now as like the man of the house where where his ancestors were before. And I just think that's fascinating. I'm the one probably who's most interested in the family history, because it really just resonates with me to have something that has lasted that long and that people pour their hearts into like that for so many years.
Yeah. And I want to talk a little bit about the business part, because the business of dairy farming has changed so much over the decades. And Seth, your family, your farm operation was part of a co-op, correct?
Yeah, and still is.
And still is. Okay, can you tell us a little bit about the dairy operation being part of a co-op? I can easily say like, oh yeah, the brand of milk I buy is a co-op, Cabot is a co-op, but I don't actually know what that means as a farmer. What is the co-op model, and how long have you been participating in that?
Well, the co-ops they're the term necessary evil is the first one that comes to mind, which is probably not totally fair, but it's also the painful truth of being a dairy farmer, and is that you have to milk your cows twice a day, every day, which means that you have a highly perishable product that has to be sold and processed, on the same sort of scale. And that's where the co-ops come in. I mean, a long time ago, there were dairy farmers that got together and said, "Hey, we need to hire a few people to take our milk, on a train to Boston, from Vermont." And what that evolved into is like, the whole idea of breaking down the different steps of the process from production to the end, consumer, and delegating and saying, okay, this group of people is going to focus on this job. This group of people is going to focus on this job. And honestly, the whole idea of that is great, and quite necessary. But what has happened with agriculture, or with dairy farming in particular in this country, is that everything has become very, very commoditized and very streamlined. And a lot of that is really necessary in order to keep, costs of production and, ultimately costs of consumers in line. But it doesn't necessarily create a roadmap for everyone. And it certainly creates in today's landscape in dairy, it doesn't create a very exciting path forward for smaller farms. And I don't think that's really debatable at this point. It's not even really personal or emotional. It's just the nature of things and the way that industries evolve.
And when you say small farms, what is the typical size of a farm, a dairy farm in a co-op? Or when you say a small farm, what does small mean?
That's a good question.
We're small.
We are, well, and so what's kind of interesting about, we are definitely a small farm right now. And what's kind of interesting about that is that in my lifetime, this farm has gone from being like an above average size farm at its peak when my mom and dad were running the operation to now, decidedly a below average size farm.
And it was the scale that shifted more than it was the number of cows, right? The idea, the definition of small changed quite a bit.
Yeah.
And
but
so,
for some for a little bit of context, the co-op that I'm a member of, that this farm's a member of, is Agrimark, which is a New England-based co-op. And, I can remember there being well over 1,000, 1,400 member farms of the co-op in New England. And I want to say that it's in the neighborhood of like 400 farms now, plus or minus.
Wow.
Like you can't quote me on exactly what that number is, but the bottom line is that it is a lot smaller. And I can assure you that like the volume of milk that Agrimark is handling in a year's time has not shrunken by like a similar factor. So
wow. Okay. That's fascinating. Is it consolidation or just fewer farms producing more milk, or?
I mean, it's a consolidation of the industry. It's the farms that are staying in are committed to getting bigger, and they present very real economic opportunities for co-ops. There's efficiencies there. When I was a kid, it was almost unheard of, for a farm to direct load tractor trailer tanker loads, of milk. And now it's really common, for a farm to have 3 or 4 tractor trailer load, trailer tanks backed up that they're chilling milk, and they're filling trailers. And when the trailer's full, they start filling the next trailer.
Wow.
And that's a big change just in the last, 25 years.
So leading to the pivotal decision making that you went through, which is where we're kind of heading in that direction in this conversation. Just one last thing, was your focus milk? Were there other products produced on the farm or other items, dairy or otherwise, or was it really focused on fluid milk?
So that's an interesting question, and the answer, is that my mom and dad were purely dairy farmers. My dad he's the quintessential hardworking Vermont dairy farmer, and that was what they did. He Yeah, and when they ran their business together, they were a great team. And my mom was an amazing force with all of the record keeping and all of the office management that needed to happen to run a business. And my dad was an amazing force of just being
Production.
able to do work,
Yeah.
getting up early in the morning every day and working really hard to make sure that everything, is being done on time and done well. And for as long as they were in business, or at least for most of their tenure in the business, there was a reward there from the marketplace. Like if you could make more milk and do a really good job with your operation, it would come back to you. And I think that that's one of the biggest challenges of the transition from them running the business to me is that scale does come into that conversation as far as how successful you can be in dairy now without value adding. Like if you're just sending milk to a co-op, that the scale really does matter because the margins are frankly just much more slender. So the diversification of our farm that's been within my generation, my tenure, so to speak. So
this is the exciting, for me, the exciting part of the conversation is this moment of decision making for you right around like 2014, 2015. Am I right on that? So I want to start, I want us to start talking about it, but I know we have to take a break and I don't want to interrupt you. So I'm going to say, let's take a break and then we'll come back and we'll hear more about it. Yeah, it sounds like a good time to pause and hear a word from our sponsor, and we'll be right back.
This episode is brought to you by Plugra European-style butter, crafted for those who demand precision and exceptional results in the kitchen. With 82% butter fat and a slow churn process, Plugra gives you flakier crusts, fluffier cakes, and rich, melt-in-your-mouth pastries. Because great baking starts with great butter. Unlike standard American butters, which have only 80% butter fat, Plugra ensures the ideal moisture and fat balance so your recipes turn out just right every time. That's why professional chefs trust Plugra and home bakers love it. Plugra's slow churn process creates a smooth, creamy butter that gives dough a soft, pliable texture, making rolling, folding, and laminating effortless. Whether you're perfecting a buttery pie crust or layering a delicate croissant, Plugra helps you bake with confidence. Experience the difference for yourself. Find Plugra in stores near you or visit plugra.com. That's Plugra.com.
Thank you for staying with us at Cutting the Curd. This is Jessica. I am talking with Seth and Kate from Woodlawn Farm, and we are talking about Seth taking over the farm, 7 generations of farming on the same land. And tell us about this period of change that you implemented on the farm. What led to it, and what kind of changes did you make?
So you mentioned 2014, which means that Kate gave you good information when you were asking some questions about what sorts of questions to ask.
You're welcome.
And 2014, it definitely was a snapshot in the history of this place because it was one of the most successful years that the farm had ever had, at least, since I've been involved, which started in 2003 officially when I graduated from college, which is that milk prices were at record highs and we made a lot of milk and we made a lot of money that year. And it was a very, very crazy, hectic year. We had an enormous manure pit project going on. We were shifting some equipment around to adopt a new strategy for harvesting hay. And there were a lot of balls in the air all year long. And I remember looking at a P&L at the end of the year, and we made money. But I remember looking at what we spent on grain that year. And at that time, we certainly fed a little bit less grain than a lot of, the farms, in the industry. And that was always because we worked really hard to harvest our forages in a timely fashion. And there's always value to be had there. And you can get away with, buying a little less grain if you do a great job with your crop harvest and still make, a good volume of milk. And so we always did that stuff. But even then, the grain bill was always the biggest expense, as it is on almost any dairy farm anywhere. And that year, our grain bill was just a lot higher than it was the year before. And our cow numbers had maintained, pretty consistently from one year to the next. We hadn't adopted wildly different feeding strategies or anything. And I just kind of realized that, we spent almost $100,000 more on grain in 2014 than we did the year before for no real reason other than that the milk price was good, because the grain side of things, there was a surplus of grain in the country, so it wasn't scarcity in the grain side of things driving, the market prices. It was just that, the market would bear it. So I kind of realized that it felt like really bad strategy to have a business where our number one source of revenue, which is milk sales, is coming from, it's determined by a commodity market that we have no control over. And the number one expense in the business, which is grain, coming from another commodity market that we had no control over. And it just felt really scary to me to not be a big farm, not have buying power, and be so at the mercy of commodity markets. And that was where I started to feel very interested in being more self-sufficient with feed and trying to, sort of spark some curiosity as far as the value-added side of things with milk.
And so, Kate, were you at Woodlawn at this point?
No,
okay.
I wasn't. I didn't get here. See, we met in 2016. So when Seth and I met, this transition was a couple of years in,
mm-hmm.
But it was still pretty new.
It was just starting. It's been like climbing a ladder, right? I mean, you do it one rung at a time. And for me, it felt like the first thing to do is to try to cut down on the grain bill. And the first way that we did that was we devoted a portion of the acreage of corn that we grew to grain. And the part that was it was pretty scary, is that in order for our land base to sustain that sort of a strategy, we actually needed to be milking fewer cows.
Right. I was going to ask, yeah.
That's kind of going left when everybody else is going right. And it's,
mm-hmm.
My dad was a little bit of a tough sell on it. He thought it was, and his reasons were not wrong. You have certain fixed expenses that don't change. And, how can you justify, making a lot less money by shipping a lot less milk? And what makes that work is, frankly, it's good land, and it's kind of betting on yourself in a sense, because you say, we can do this. We can harvest grain. We have land that will grow a great crop and will be rewarded with good yields, because we tend to be year in and year out because of our wonderful land. And then you just have to do the work. And if you are willing to bet on yourself to do the work, then there's a benefit to be had.
So what happened to the yield and to the quality of the milk with those changes? What were you keeping track of?
Well, we were keeping track of, the bottom line, and our ability to grow corn much more affordably than we could buy it on the open market. It immediately started to show some positive returns, and we didn't we didn't see any huge differences like with the cows or with milk production, because it's essentially we were feeding them, whatever component of their diet corn grain made up before it. We didn't really change that when we started to grow our own grain. We were just feeding them corn grain that we grew instead of corn grain that we bought. And so there wasn't a huge difference like with the cows. It's just, we were spending $110 or $120 a ton on corn grain that we had been spending over $300 a ton on when we were buying it. So, those are the kinds of numbers that can make a real difference. When you're talking about purchased feed being your number one expense, if you can take that big a bite out of it, it's a big deal.
Well, I just want to layer on too. I think there's the satisfaction of utilizing the land, and I think that's a huge part too of what makes this strategy so satisfying. For Seth certainly, but like as he said, looking down from the valley and seeing, or from the hill, seeing the valley and the working farms, and knowing that he's actually utilizing this land base. That we're, lucky that the family has preserved and grown over these generations, and turning it into something that, that keeps our herd happy and healthy.
So where did cheese enter this?
Well, that was the other side of the equation, right? So there was managing the input cost side, and then there was, we're making great milk. Shouldn't we be benefiting from that?
So this all started, the cheese side of things started, Angela Miller had started Consider Bardwell in West Paulet. And so that was going on in town. And I had met Angela. I knew what was going on over there. We had plenty of discussions about potentially buying milk someday, all that kind of good stuff. But at the same time, there was a guy that was making cheese at the Hildene farm in Manchester. He was coming up with milk cans and buying really small quantities of milk. and he was making cheese down there. And, he was very complimentary of the milk quality. And in my mind, like we had always strived for excellent milk quality. And to me, that's just the way that you want to do things. If you have excellent milk quality, it means that your cows are healthy. It means that the people that are milking the cows every day are conscientious and doing a great job. And it means that your equipment is clean and operating properly. And if you do those things, then you will produce high quality milk. And so I always looked at it from the standpoint, I don't ever want to not be doing those things. So I always want to be making really high quality milk. And what this guy helped me realize was that there was a real benefit to someone standing over a cheese vat to milk that's of that quality. And how that sort of came to pass is he happened to be friends with Peter Dixon, who anyone who knows artisan cheese in Vermont knows Peter Dixon, right?
Across the country now too.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, anywhere, right? And Peter's such a great dude. I actually reached out to him, and essentially I paid him to do a little bit of consulting to just go over and sit down with him and have him explain to me what do cheesemakers want? What is important and why is it important? And, just some of the ins and outs of it, because the thing that I realized right away is that as a dairy farmer, you're just on that production side. And don't get me wrong, there's plenty to occupy yourself with on that side, but we're, historically all about making the milk, getting it into the bulk tank and getting it cold and getting it out the door. And meeting with Peter was when I started to understand that there really is a lot of value in what we were doing to cheesemakers. And the key there is that there's value without changing anything. We were we were doing a really good job within our system. And the result of that was really valuable to cheesemakers. And so I wound up reaching out to Plymouth Artisan Cheese and to Crowley Cheese in Mount Holly, Vermont. And those places are both about an hour's drive from the farm, because I knew that I'd heard from Peter and from this other fellow that was making cheese at Hildene that, you know, those places were actually really desperately in need of good quality raw milk, because they were raw milk cheesemakers. And so a conversation started with them. And when I told them about our milk quality and asked them if they were interested, you know, they were immediately interested, because what they saw from me was far better than anything that they had as an option, like buying commingled loads of milk from essentially from a co-op. And it wasn't so for that to happen, it was about logistics. And it was I was fortunate enough to convince the guys at Thomas Dairy, who used to be a fluid milk processor in Rutland, who and honestly, I think it only happened because the main employee of Thomas Dairy that actually did all of the hauling for a few years grew up in Pollitt, and my dad used to play softball with him. He grew up in Pollitt. And I think he just was like, yeah, I mean, they had the extra truck, but I mean, he had plenty to do, and they gave me Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday as options for trucking. And so I went back to Plymouth and Crowley, and I said, here's what I can do, you know, and we made that work for a few years. And then when COVID hit, Thomas went out of business, and I bought the truck because it was buy the truck or lose the market. And for a year, I hauled the milk, but I had to wash the truck at Thomas Dairy in Rutland, which is, 45 minutes from the farm. So that was painful.
It was a long day. Yeah.
And then we ultimately got a wash facility for the milk truck built here at the farm, and things got a lot better there. But that's,
I do want to point out, Kate, you mentioned this when we talked too. A lot of this conversation around the milk delivery is because as a co-op, the milk was picked up, right? So this was like a new dimension for you.
Yeah, that's that's the sort of the beauty of what co-ops offer, right? And I think I think my husband's wonderful, right? So one of the things that I think he's really good at that is just not necessarily common in the field is like talking to people and actually like marketing a product. And farmers have been very lucky, and sort of designed a system where they didn't have to do that because they're selling to a co-op, and then the co-op goes and sells it, right? They come and pick it up and they take it somewhere, and it's not your problem anymore.
Right. And the milk is all pooled together.
Well.
We made it our problem. So,
and that's where, when you talk about advantages and disadvantages of a co-op, that's the part where I have to circle back and say that, like, none of what I've just described about, like, supplying milk to Plymouth and Crowley is possible without being a member of Agrimark, because effectively Agrimark is selling those guys my milk. Yeah. And it's all above board. It's all, like that's what Agrimark does. They buy my milk from the farm, and their job is to sell it. I'm just effectively telling them who they're selling it to, and and delivering it. But none of that's possible unless I'm a member of a co-op, and the co-op is picking up my milk at the farm when those other customers aren't taking milk, because they don't take all of the milk. They can't take all of the milk. So it has to go somewhere, so that's just been one of the ways where I feel like, I've taken a look at what being a member of Agrimark means to me, as far as the future of the business, and used, something that I'm able to do with, and still be working within the confines of my contract to my advantage. And not all co-ops operate that way. Like what I do with my local cheesemakers is not something that some other co-ops would allow. As heinous as that sounds, it's true. So it really is it's about a whole bunch of people kind of working together,
And the new layer of all of this is now you are actually a creamery on top
Yes.
of everything else. And you
Right.
did
We
mention
needed more to do. Yeah.
right, you needed more to do because and again, Kate, our wonderful conversation, I loved our talk. You said farm needs more risk, right? Like
Right. Right.
yeah. So you mentioned Angela and Consider Bardwell, and
Mhm.
so we know that Consider Bardwell had quite a following. Paulette and Rupert, I've sold that as a cheesemonger in my past. So what was the journey to those cheeses now being under the Woodlawn name?
I'll say a couple things about that. I mean, I think I remember when I first came here to the farm, I'm pretty sure that Seth had Rupert on a cheese board to try and impress me, and it worked. And I think he was always really proud that those cheeses came from this place, like came from Paulette. And I mean, our farm is actually on the line of Paulette and Rupert, right? These are our town names. And so I think the fact that Angela, decided to name cheese after the towns of our area, there was something really nice about that, and it meant a lot. And so, I think when they were sort of ready to be finding their way out of that business, we were just thinking, man, like we're supplying milk to these cheesemakers, and that's great, but man, what if we could actually be cheesemakers as well, and keep these cheeses that we have loved, and that mean so much to us going.
Yeah, and there was also some history between our farm and Consider as well. I mean, there was a time when Consider was at their like peak production. Angela was actually buying 6,000 pounds of milk from me once a week. And so, I had become familiar with what was going on over there. I gotten to know Angela a little bit, and Leslie, obviously, and the general manager at the time. And just, I was just very curious, and I mean, I admired what they did. I mean, they moved up here and bought a place, and Angela had an idea, and it was a little bit of a crazy idea. I think she would even admit that. But what they did was like create something really wonderful. And what Angela did was find a lot of the right people. I mean, Peter Dixon, she hired him. Like, he's the one that created many of the recipes over there. And Leslie, grew up in the small town of Granville, New York, just across the border. And she started working at Consider when she was like 15 years old. And as a, like sparkly eyed, hardworking teenager, she decided that she was really interested in what was going on in the creamery, and went in and worked with Peter, and like just she fell in love with making cheese, and she fell in love with making those cheeses. And that was always really just abundantly clear to me, and really valuable. I mean, I always felt like Leslie was a really remarkable talent, and just kind of an awesome person too, so like there's that history there. And, so yeah, we were interested in doing something with cheese, but there was no
Not just
way.
any cheese. Yeah.
Not just any
Yeah.
cheese. And there was no way that we were going to try to do anything without Leslie. Because, like, to me, she kind of is, though, like, she is considered Bardwell as much as any other one single thing. And I just think that her mark is hard to ignore. And then having conversations with her over the years and just hearing her just wanting to be making those cheeses, and it was an opportunity that was interesting enough to kind of dive into and chase a little bit.
In a way, this is a story of what we are facing more and more every year. We hear about cheeses that are disappearing because of either a succession plan or lack thereof, or the death of a cheesemaker, or a farm has to close for whatever reason. I mean,
Sure.
I think of like Sally Jackson's cheeses out in the Northwest when I first started. I mean, those were revolutionary cheeses to my palate, and they're gone. And we know Landaff, a Crowley cheese. Like, there's certain cheeses that we can look at and say, I remember this cheese, and the recipe is lost to history with any kind of negative connotation, but just like in a way that they're kind of done. And so you purchased the rights to Paulette and Rupert. Is that how this happens?
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
You purchased the rights to the cheeses. Okay. And then Leslie, when we say Leslie, we're talking about Leslie Goff Tominski, correct?
Right. Yeah.
She is the considered Bardwell cheesemaker that has joined forces with you to continue the make of these cheeses. Is she doing that? Where is that happening?
So we're renting the old facility. So that was the Consider Bardwell facility. So that was the most cost-effective way for us to get into the business, right? It's fully equipped. Leslie knows it well. And we were able to really hit the ground running last January.
Mm-hmm. And what's the reception been like to these cheeses? I mean, I know because I had my own reaction, but how have people been responding?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been really positive. It's funny. I was just thinking about an email I got this week, and it was from a cheese shop down in New Jersey that had been talking with a retired cheesemonger who said, "Man, like, I'm doing these informal tastings with friends, and I wish they were still making Paulette and Rupert." And she said, "Aha! In fact, somebody is." And so I just filled that order today and sent down half a wheel of each. And so I think there's been a lot of excitement, and I think especially when we say Leslie's name, and when we tell the story of the farm and the sort of authentic multi-generational roots of the milk business, and that now being turned into Paulette and Rupert by this incredible, young, very local cheesemaker. I think people are really excited about that. And yeah, it's been very busy, which I take to be a really good thing.
Yeah. And you're now, well, in a way you've always been, or at least for quite a while, you've been part of the fabric of the American artisanal cheese scene. And now you really are, because you attended ACS and we're seeing you at the food shows. Is there anything, any observations you have, again, like just now being more the face of the cheese side, not just the milk side? What impressions have you had? How's it been to be part of another community on top of the dairy farming community?
Well, I think it's been super embracing. I mean, I remember we actually went to our first ACS well before we got into the cheese business. Seth was invited to be on a panel down in Richmond. Was that 2019?
Yeah, that was, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, so he was part of a panel talking with Peter Dixon and with Jesse from Plymouth, right? Talking about milk quality and cheese. And I think that was just such a great introduction. Everybody was incredibly excited to have a farmer there. Um, and I don't know, it was fascinating. Like, it was so exciting to have somebody who actually was in this other part of the business, and they had so many questions. And I still feel that way, going to Vermont Cheese Council events, and people are just really collaborative and helpful and partnering, and people share things when they need it. It's just like, it's a really wonderful group of people. Seth, did you have something you wanted to say?
Well, I was just going to, say something very similar as far as how friendly and inviting everyone is in the cheese business. Like, you can be in a room full of people that effectively are competitors, right? Like, you're all making cheese, and yet that's not at all the vibe that you get. And I think that that just stems from people just truly being passionate about cheese in general, and that the win for them is that they want to make good cheese, in their own house, but they just want the world to have good cheese options. And they know that not every, people aren't going to just eat exactly the same cheese every time they eat cheese. And so if we're making an Alpine style and someone else is making, a blue cheese, they're so different that, like, not everybody wants one all the time. And it just seems like everybody that we've talked to is just kind of happy to have us in the room with them. And that feels really nice when we go and do trade shows or, ACS or whatever.
Yeah. When you get off the farm, like for the like brief respite from all the work.
Yeah, exactly. There is always a lot of talk about, like, the availability of dairy farmers to participate in conferences or judging or anything, or even to be able to send their cheese. The ACS changing the deadlines to submit cheese for the judging was also part of the conversation. Was, well, there's the seasonal rhythms of cheese making, and some things may not be ready when we decide to have a competition, and the seasonality of that. It's always a great reminder, the things that farmers bring to the table, because they're not always visible. So on that note, in closing, I was wondering, because we started off, you said a few very sobering things, Seth, about farmers and dairy farmers and the realities in the country. Is there anything you want to leave us with, speaking to cheese enthusiasts and mostly cheese industry people in this podcast? Is there anything you would like to share with us in closing from the dairy farming side?
Well, I think the win always for dairy, whether it's artisanal cheese or fluid milk or yogurt or whatever, is that we just want the general consumer to feel like we're doing good work, and that the products of our industry are good, healthy foods that are a positive part of everyone's diet. And, like, the kind of cheese that we're making, specifically, they're not cheeses that are going to land in everyone's refrigerator, and that's okay. Like, that's the way the world works. But to me, what I want to encourage is for people to drink milk and to eat yogurt and to eat cheese, and for all of those products to be real, and not, don't buy the yogurt that's like half sugar, buy yogurt that's like tastes great because it was made with really good milk, and I think that fighting the bigger battle with, other beverage, the beverage industry, like, there's so many competitors now to fluid milk and to yogurt, to everything, that the win for the dairy industry is for people to feel like dairy products are good, and to eat them and feel like they're nutritious and healthy, and and that the people that
pleasurable. Yeah.
Well, and that the people that, you know, back at the farm, they're mostly family businesses. Like even if they're a huge operation, and that's one of the things like about being a small farmer, I don't hold it against someone that's decided to take their family farm to 2,500 or 5,000 cows or whatever, because all they were doing is what they felt like was best for their family and for their business, and that's all I've ever done. It just looks, it doesn't always look the same, but it doesn't mean that our values aren't very similar. And that's what I think I would want anyone listening that's just a general consumer to try to take away, is that like the work that we're doing it's really hard, and we really just want to make something good for people to enjoy that's good for them.
I am so happy about having both of you on. This has been such an incredible conversation, and just thank you so much. I don't think I could say anything else except just thank you so much. And yeah, I look forward to seeing both of you possibly at the Vermont Cheesemaker Festival.
Oh yeah.
Great.
We'll be there.
Yeah, and that's August.
Oh God, I wish I knew the date.
It's sometime in August. I want to say like 12th or 8th.
Yeah, we're gonna be at the Good Food Show in New York. We're gonna be at the Fancy Food Show in New York. We're gonna be at ACS. It's gonna be a really, really busy year.
Yeah, definitely a busy summer. Lots of opportunities to see you guys.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and to everyone who was listening, remember you can always check us out on Instagram at Cutting the Curd. You can find us at heritageradionetwork.org. Please check out Woodland Farm, Woodland Creamery. Find their cheeses, seek them out, or stop by one of the several places that Kate listed off that they will be this summer. And we hope to have you back with us at Cutting the Curd soon.
Cutting the Curd is powered by Simplecast. Thanks for listening to Heritage Radio Network, food radio supported by you. Keep in touch at heritageradionetwork.org/subscribe.